Is it right or not yet? आपको पाए हैं seriously? Well, so let's begin with the second part of your question.
You got the first part.
Yes.
Just hypothetically, if that West, which I mentioned yesterday or some decades ago, had continued as such, and we, even today, were we to learn that Islam and live that Islam from that West, and finally, we have got a message to push far and wide. And are we taking good care as to if we ourselves care to live the message?
That's the second question, not the second part of the first question, right?
The second part. And the last thing, yesterday you were so sweet and generous and gracious to call me over, and that involved me in this question. I thought probably you want me to participate in this place, so I dug out this question. And today I may sound a little bit impertinent. Probably it's my last evening with you. I would like to say my last prayer right behind you. The reason being, सिद्धा उसी का सिद्ध है, सर्व ही सरफराज है, यार के पाए नाज़नी. Would you complete it? इसकी अदा नमाज.
Yar here is meant differently by many.
That's the only friend for all of us who can be a better friend than you.
The question started with a strong comparison between the moral state as found in the European countries, Western countries, two or three or four decades ago, and the moral state in comparison which was witnessed in the so-called Islamic countries, or the Oriental countries in general. And the inference drawn from this comparison was that some people observed that if you want to see Islam in practice, you better come to the West, to the Christian world, rather than go to the Muslim world. That is in a nutshell the essence of the question, that part of the question which was asked yesterday. And the second part, which is revealed today, deals with this aspect that suppose if that Western civilization, as was found a few decades ago, had preserved in all purity till today, then were we to learn Islam from that civilization? And as the question himself said, it was just hypothetical. So it's only an academic interest in it, not a real interest, because he agrees that that Islam, if it is called Islam properly, is no longer in existence in West either. And the third is that we as Ahmadis are regarding the values for which we were created to guard and to impart them to the rest of the world. So as far as the first comparison is concerned, I think Malik Sahib has not done his homework properly and extensively, because without defining Islam, you can't enter into comparing the values of Islam or declaring the values of Islam to be found in a certain civilization. Islam is a wide religion, or a very wide concept. It has relations to human interest, both in this world and in the world to come. It deals with all aspects of human nature in which man can have interest. It deals with the political aspects of human life, moral aspects of human life, individual relation to individual, child relation to the mother and to the father, and the vice versa, concept of friendship, relationship between master and slave, relationship between those who govern and those who are governed, those who are economically well off and those who are economically poor off, those who decide to go to wars and those against whom the sword has been raised. Everything, every aspect of human life is covered by Islam and has been extensively demonstrated by Islam. So, first of all, the question should have dealt with the concept of Islam, and then it should have defined which part of Islam was in evidence. Then if it had been said that were we to learn that part of Islam from there, it would have been a valid question. But to call part a whole first, and then to derive a conclusion based on this erroneous conclusion to begin with, is, to say the least, is a very incomplete and incorrect way of approaching a problem. Number two, when you begin to compare things like this, unless you analyze further other aspects which come into this comparison, which emerge as factors in this comparison, you won't be able to clearly visualize the true picture. Let's further investigate the whole situation as presented to us. Number one, Islam is neither found in practice here nor there. As such, whatever we find here is something else that may have some similarities to certain Islamic values. And Islam is not practiced in the East either, because whatever you see there is not Islam at all. So where does Islam come into picture? Just a minute, let me finish. When you were asking the question, I didn't interfere with your question. Please hear me out with patience, and this is also a part of Islam, as I know it. So, what is it which you are comparing? That has to be decided first. Is it Western civilization you are comparing, or is it influence of Christianity which you are comparing? First that has to be decided. And as I see it, Christianity is no longer seen in practice anywhere in the world as such. Because centuries ago, the Christian world had revolted against Christianity, and the new civilization which emerged from that revolt is called Western civilization or Christian civilization erroneously. In fact, for instance, if the teachings of Christianity were kept in mind, that part of the teaching in particular, which even they agree is there, I mean not the controversial part. For instance, if somebody slaps on the one side of your face, you should offer the second one. Now, if this is Christianity and this is Christianity, everybody agrees. Where is it in practice? And it is completely an erroneous idea to consider the Western civilization as a Christian civilization, as it is wrong to claim that the Muslim civilization today is Islamic civilization. both have lost their bearing completely, and what we see is the civilization of a well-to-do people who are scientifically advanced, who have had long experience of conflict and of struggle between themselves and between them and the others. And they are a few centuries ahead of us, not in religion, but in that experience and that learning process. Their clergy has had to pass through those narrow channels of minds which our clergy in the East is passing through today. Their conduct in religion, their behavior towards other mankind, their so-called supremacy over others in piety and religious values, all that is an experience of the West left far behind in centuries. The phase of economic development through which we are passing today, if you want to observe the West passing through the same phase, you better start reading English novels covering that period or English history, if you want to be more sure of it. But there are certain English novelists who were very true in depicting the culture of that time and the habits of that time and the economic values and how they came into clash with each other. Today when you see a few boys being abducted for the sake of forced labor in Pakistan or in some other eastern poor countries, when the West is found in the same stage of economic development, you would see much more horrible pictures evolving there and much more intensive. When you see religious hatred in exercise in some eastern countries in the name of Islam, one thing is positive, that Islam doesn't dictate such things. So does not Christianity. But when you go back in history, when the same period is found in the West as we are passing through today, you will find much more heinous atrocities were committed by the Western people than centuries of despotism on the part of Muslims could have produced. And this is historical evidence. I have given it before. I can repeatedly give it, and so far I have not come across a single Western scholar who contradicted me on this issue. There are reigns of Western emperors where terror was let loose in the name of religion, which surpassed the entire terror which was let loose in the Islamic history, the whole Islamic history, in the name of religion. Just go through the history of plague, as I mentioned earlier, once here in this session. Go through the history of 14th century plague, and you will be surprised that the atrocity committed against the Jews by the Christians almost offset the early atrocities committed against the Christians by the Jews. The I should say shone is not the right word. If there was some word outdarkened, that should have been used. So, to see things in their relative perspective is highly important before you begin to draw your conclusions. So this has to be analyzed before the question is to be asked. What are we comparing? Comparing an advanced society which is 200 years ahead of us with a backward society and calling this Islam and calling that Christianity or something else, I mean, this is just stretching things too far, too much. Islam has to be compared with the values of Christianity or the claims of Christianity at best. Islamic civilization has first to be analyzed in theory, and then it has to be compared with any other civilization in theory. That would be a right comparison. But you can't compare a dream with reality. A thing which is non-existent with a thing which is existent. It is a theory. Islam is, when not in practice, is a theory. And a civilization in practice is not a theory. However weak it may be, when it is compared with a theory, it would defeat the theory. But the comparison is wrong. So all that you can say is that unfortunately, the Muslim world has gone astray and has left Islam far behind. With the result that the present civilization, which is so ugly to look at, so horrible, so ridden, that civilization is something which has emerged from the local conditions of a backward nation. That is the best conclusion you can draw. And on the other side, whatever credit there is, it goes to a long experience, which is economic experience more than anything. For instance, you see milk not being stolen here. Why? Because everybody's economic standard is so high that to steal milk is just useless and meaningless. But whatever is meaningful they do. They don't hesitate. So the comparative difference of outlook has created this so parallax between the two civilizations, while in reality, in internal comparisons, they are reacting in the same manner as irreligious societies, governed not by the religious laws, but by the laws of human nature. And those laws follow these conditions and the economic experience, and there are so many other factors which have to be fed into them before you realize in what way certain people are going to react. When stresses come, that is the time to see what happens to these civilizations. Their advanced, their claim of advanced morality, for instance, the sheen of culture which they present to the onlooker. At the time of stresses, it completely vanishes into thin air. A very different and ugly picture emerges from within. Similarly, as I have been telling you before, the so-called morality is a relative term in the West. And it is shattered to pieces when that morality is sought to be applied to other nations as against their own interest. That is to say, I will explain that further, when the moral concept of a Britisher is to be applied to a Pakistani, it won't equally apply in both places. If the national interest of the Britisher is served by that equal application, it will be equally applied. If it does not serve the national interest of a Britisher, the moral concept will go overboard, because the ultimate analysis of their morality is whatever is good for the nation is moral. The other day, a group from Cambridge, the students, postgraduate, some postgraduate students from Cambridge came here to discuss these things. So one of them asked this very question in a different manner. So when I told him about their moral concept and its relativity, the questioner fully agreed, immediately. He said, I know this is absolutely correct. I said, individually, when the question of justice comes, and when it does not clash with your national interest, you will be more just to a Pakistani, to a Hindu, to a Jew, than perhaps a Pakistani would be. But when you think in national terms, even if the whole nation is to be wiped out from the face of earth, if the interest of that nation, however just, clashes with your interest, your loyalty would demand that you decide in favor of the British interest. This is an overruling moral philosophy which governs every moral subordinate law for you. I say, so why do you have to laugh on Lenin's philosophy, which ultimately breaks down to this? This is exactly what Lenin said. He had the courage to admit, while the West does not have the courage to admit that. Lenin said that all this morality is hocus pocus unless it is defined as such, that whatever serves the cause of communism is moral, and whatever does not serve the cause of communism is immoral. So this in reality is the concept of morality. When they go into wars, their behavior is so immoral and beastly that you simply cannot imagine unless you read the history of their wars. I have read that history. I have read many books on the previous war, history of the previous war, particularly that by Churchill. Nobody can say that he is not an authority. It's a 5-volume, big, huge book. And once you go through it, then you realize what beastly depths they can reach when their interests clash with others, even if they are Western nations. And when they begin to decide issues, global issues, then they admit openly that they decide issues on the color basis. The yellow thread and the black thread and the dark brown thread and so on and so forth. And even communist philosophy is forgotten at that time. As against the evil of the yellow thread, the Russian white would favor the Western white. So what is morality here? As I explained earlier, the morality in nutshell here is an economic experience. Nothing more. A long economic experience gives you a sort of wisdom in normal everyday conduct. And in the final analysis, morality is nothing but a gain experience in wisdom, a sum total of experience of ages of wisdom, or the vice versa, wisdom gained by ages of experience. Because common man could not reach such things directly, so either sages had to tell them that this is ultimately good for you, or religion had to tell them. Where religion tells them, despite great deterioration in economic values, some remnant is still left. And when faced with extreme stresses, those nations who previously were less moral as compared to some other world nations do not sink below a certain level of immorality. But those nations whose roots are not religious, but they have gained their morality through a long experience alone, when stress comes to them and they are tried, they break down completely and their moral standard stoops much lower than those poor nations against whom they was rated higher in moral values. For instance, I'll again compare not West with East, but Hinduism or the Indian morality with the Pakistani morality. However cruel you may call Pakistanis to behave to you, when the anti-Ahmadi hostility comes into play, they have a lowest minimum moral standard taught to them by Islam, which is not taught to Hindus by Hinduism or by Indian culture. So they can stoop to a certain depth, but no longer, not beyond. And beyond that, it's impossible for them. They break down themselves. So I have seen, I remember, 34 agitation as well as 53 agitation as well as 74 agitation against Ahmadis. Some among them were really cruel, of course. But the majority could not be cruel. Despite all the hatred that was worked up by the mullah, they had that Islamic values in them, which the rock bottom for which was quite high. While the Hindus, when they are excited in hatred against any other, they know no limit. There is no comparison between atrocities committed by Hindus against Muslims as compared to the atrocities committed by the Muslims against Ahmadi Muslims. So again, the same is the comparison point. Under stress, certain values remain to stay, and those are religious values. And certain values are superficial with an apparent sheen, and they are the values gained by long experience. So even this comparison, even if you give them full marks for their culture, because it is the culture which is seen by some eyes. Ordinary liberty, human liberty, nobody would snatch your bottle of milk or things while the purses are now being snatched. This is why the gentleman, who is quite an intelligent gentleman, said it is hypothetical. If that civilization had remained intact as we saw it a few decades ago. This is why that if was added. But the fact is, why it is breaking down? Because the values are breaking down which were responsible for this culture. That economic standard is breaking down. That world empire has broken down, which gave the culture of nobility. It is like the culture of a king's family as compared to the poor man's culture. When kingdoms break, then the same people begin to behave even worse than the poor man. I have noticed myself, sometimes when in Rabba we have large feasts where poor people are also invited, some careless observers very cruelly begin to laugh at the way the poor people eat. When they are given the chance of eating pulao and delicacies, they sometimes laugh and giggle, they look here, So that makes me cry sometimes. And I tell them later on, it's a shame on you. In fact, you're forgetting this fact that even if you were tried with one day's deprivation of those good things which you are provided every day, you would fall more inhumanly upon these things, fall to such food without control and in a more shameful manner as you judge these people. They still have the decency of offering you first when they see a rich man come stand closer to them. But you won't have that decency left to you. Your children at the time of crisis, they completely break down and forget that they have been fed so much by Allah, and they become so impatient by the trial of just one missing meal or so, So that is what I mean. Things when they are compared, they have to be put in their right perspective, and it should be made very clear what is being compared to what. So given everything, this civilization of today cannot be compared with what is found in the East of today, because there is an age lapse of at least 200 or 300 years. So go back to that age and then begin to compare and draw your conclusions. I won't have any objection. But to take something from far ahead and something from a backward place and to begin to compare, this is not a correct approach. This is like my brother's case. Mr. Ahmed is one of my brothers who is not I mean, our family is not very fair, but quite fairish as compared to the general standard of our country. Unfortunately, this boy and one other brother are not very fair. Rather, this Azhar happened to be on the darkest side, particularly when he was a young child. So the other brother used to tease him, "Look here, you are dark." And he got irritated very much. So once he thought of a very clever device of comparison. Hazrat Muslim Maud was watching him while he was doing this. He got hold of his younger brother and said, "Look here, you say I am dark, come on, show me your hair, look at my skin. Which is darker?" He got hold of his hair, a bunch of his hair, and compared it with his skin and said, "Can't you see? You are darker and I am fairer." Huzur had a good laugh at this. So a comparison has to be made in the same values and at the same juncture of history. And I must tell you, I'm offering, this is not the part of the question, but I'm offering you this, that most often than not, we make mistakes in our judgment by not understanding time. When we say we are modern people, the word modern is most often misapplied because human procession at one time is found to indicate so many different ages. This is not the time for every nation, the most forward time. There is a vanguard. If that vanguard is to be taken as standard belonging to 1984, in that very time there will be people living in 2000 BC on this same earth. So there is an unbroken procession which goes back, the tail end goes back and emerges thousands of years before. For example, go to visit this Congo and the Pygmies or Aborigines of Australia in their encampments, not in the cities, who are not yet educated. And many of the civilizations in the West or Red Indian civilizations, or Mayas, then you would understand what I mean. The human procession is never found at one stage in time, in terms of time. The vanguard is living in the present and the tail end emerges thousands of years before. So how can you make comparisons in time? You can only make comparisons with conditions. Lay preconditions first. That this is a religion. When this religion faces such stresses, then this is the result. Put another religion in the same condition and apply the same stresses to that religion. What would be the result? That is a comparison which is valid. A civilization under such stresses behaves like this. Another civilization, when put to subjected to such stresses, it behaves like that. That is an acceptable comparison. So Malak Sahib has shown quite some patience with my discourse, so I should like him to add something if he wants to, please.
My question actually, or the clarification I requested for was just very partial, very limited. I was not at all comparing the complete body of Islam with the complete teaching of Islam.
That's what I have explained briefly.
Pardon?
That is exactly what I have said. You don't understand that.
I had two traditions in my mind actually for such a subject. Huzma Safa, where would you find it? Huzma Safa. In fact, as it is said, probably it is correct, that truth is never new and it is nobody's property. Nobody can say, well, I have discovered it and I have meant it.
Except for one,
Well,
saying of Hazrat Rasulullah,
that's what the second tradition I had in mind. So I would love to jump to anything beautiful which is in line with the values of Islam. I don't care where I find them, that was the point. So when I related the impression of those people at that particular time, that was only in a very relative way, that they also admired that magic in a way, that was a magical impact on them, that they, being Muslims, they had to profess and say that, well, Islam, these values, they also were saying very relatively what sort of Muslim they were. It is beside the point, but that was very, very relatively important question for our civilization, which we have produced. Was no comparison between Islamic civilization and the Western civilization. Horrible in many ways, of course. I despise it myself. I hate to know that civilization at all. But it was just a relative thing that beauty is beauty wherever it is.
That is correct. There is no doubt about it.
I actually more myself have a word from
beauty. But some of the audience misunderstand you, and then it's my duty to clarify their impression of what you said. So in fact, I was doing that. Any other questions, please? Yes. So you are doing Shikha. So Shikha side.
Hazur, my name is Muhammad Abdul Rashid.
Sorry about that.
I don't mind, you can call me Rashid.
Muhammad Abdul Rashid.
Yeah, well, original name was Abdul Rashid, but I am in Muhammad later on. I have a question about Hazrat Muhammad to ask. We say Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We say An-Nabiyyu Ummi. And you see there are 2 or 3.
You don't have to say that.
I'm ready somewhere.
It would be quite different.
Ummi, हमारे नबी Ummi.
That would be An-Nabi is my mother.
No, I'm not doing that way. You see, sir, there are quite a few thoughts. Some say that he was not really literate and he was, and then according to Surah Hudaybiyah, there is an incident when Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam changed the wording which Hazrat Ali wrote, and he put Muhammad ibn Abdullah instead of Muhammad Rasulullah. So obviously he was not Ummi the way they translated. Could you kindly explain?
That incident you are quoting does not indicate what you are indicating, unfortunately. The fact is that when Ahmad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was told to sign, he knew how to sign his name. That is one thing he had learned. But when he was made a prophet, at that time he was totally illiterate, in the sense that he had not read the art of reading or writing at all. But he learned how to write his name, and he knew where it was written. And he was dictating what was being dictated to Hazrat Ali. It was dictated by Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that write this and write that. So he knew what was written just before he was expected to sign. It was written Muhammadur Rasulullah. So the opponent, being hostile to the claim of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he was Rasulullah, Allah's prophet, insisted that in this agreement this word Rasulullah should not enter, because in the first place we do not believe you to be Rasulullah. Had we believed you to be Rasulullah, why should we have behaved in such a manner to you? So remove this Rasulullah, otherwise it will be a reflection upon us that knowing you to be Rasulullah, agreeing to this, having considered the point, yet we began to behave in such a manner to you and were so hostile. So he said, in principle, I object to this. Sahaba took it sentimentally. And they said, it's impossible for us to have this word removed, obliterated after once it was written. And Ahmad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was above sentiments. He was so judicious-minded, and he was so well poised in all his qualities, and so great and magnanimous in his attitude to the adversary, that he just took it lightly. He said, yes, he has made a point. So if you don't want to do it, I'll do it. Tell me where it is. And when he was shown where it was written, he just obliterated it, deleted it. That doesn't show that he knew how to read and write. This is the incident.
Yes, sir. On that somewhere that he did know how to read and write.
No. Never. You must have read. You must have mixed things up. I have not read it anywhere. Maybe you have. I don't deny that. But first of all, find out which book and then let me know.
It is in the Nukush new edition which they have printed.
Huh?
Mia Muhammad Khair Sahab has printed Nukush edition part 1.
You bring it to me and I'll see what authority he quotes. Or just give me the authority he quotes for this. Ahmad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam never learned how to read or how to write except for his signature. He might remember only this. Maybe you forgot it. So go when you go back, read this part again and let me know tomorrow. It will come tomorrow. Right?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Finishing your question.
But ask another question. I'm sorry, this question has two parts. We know there are 124,000 prophets. 124,000 prophets have arrived and different time to time. In the Tafsir Sahih, sir, there are mentioned 30 of them. And what I want to know from you is, sir, this Hazrat Luqman, he has been mentioned as an eminent philosopher, not as a prophet. So I wonder if you could kindly explain whether he was a prophet, and same is the case with Zulkifl. And then
first of all, explain how would this question be treated as the second part of the first question.
Sorry, it's a long question. I still some more to come.
This is a long question.
Shall I carry on?
Yes. Go ahead.
The other parts are there is Zulkifl man. We say this is how we say Masimo Islam could be called Zulkarnain. And then third part of the question is, how can two prophets come at the same time, as happened in the case of Musa and Harun, and to the same nation?
How do they come? They could come exactly the same manner. And
there is some ruling of that.
when you remember the ruling, then let me know. Now the second part of the first question, this is the second part, is further divided into a few parts, right? First of all, you want to know the names, perhaps, it was implied but not said in so many words, of those prophets who have not been mentioned in the Holy Quran and who happen to be numbering somewhere between 124,000, some plus minus. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you want to know the names of all those. You don't want to, eh?
No, I'm asking the names, sir.
Yes. Now, after making this broad, ground base for asking your question, you limited it to only two. One was Zulkifl and the other was Luqman. About Luqman we know that he was one of the wise men and has never been mentioned as a prophet in the Holy Quran. But Zul-Kifl is taken to be a prophet by all the scholars of who read the Holy Quran, because it is mentioned in the list of prophets. So Zul-Kifl is understood to be, by some scholars, Buddha of India, because he belonged to a place, Kefal or Kapil or something like that, you know. The place of his origin is called Kefal or Kapul, I don't remember.
Kapil Vastu.
Kapil Vastu, that's right. Kapil. So Kifl is the Arabic pronunciation of Kapil. So Zul-Kifl, the one who belongs to Kapil. And because he is an obscure prophet, no prophet by such name is found in the history of those prophets who appeared in the Middle East. So that is an added factor in favor of this theory, that Zul-Kifl, who is an obscure prophet as far as the Middle East goes, belongs to some different part of the world. So we must find out where he was. And when we study the history of other nations and other religions, then this is the nearest possible explanation. So as far as Luqman is concerned, he is taken to be only a wise man. As far as Zul-Kifl goes, this is my conjecture, and I tend to agree with this theory, that it was the Buddha which was mentioned. Some say that there are other prophets as well who apparently are mentioned as Middle Eastern prophets, but who belong to other regions of the world. But it's yet an open question. Some people are investigating on this issue, and I told some Ahmadi scholars to work on this. And this was the first part of the second part of your first question, right? Now, what was the second part of your second part of the question? Yes, I got it, yes. Now, Zulkarnain, as far as I am concerned, this is my unshakable fundamental view, that whatever Hazrat Masih Maud derives 100% from Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam's viewpoint, and not in his individual capacity as such. So originally, Hazur sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Zulkarnain, according to my reading of the Holy Quran, because he is the one who brought two ages together. He was at the juncture of two ages. He divides the past with the future, and he was to last till the end of the time. So his age has not ended. So whatever age man will find himself in would be the age of Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the ages behind are the dark ages, or the undeveloped ages, or ages still passing through lesser development stages. And this is the age which has advanced now into a great, glorious, ultimate age where mankind would be brought together as one people. And that golden era would dawn under Islam, under the cover of Islam, and under the acceptance, under, I should say, the banner of Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So initially he was the Zulkarnain, the one who stood at the Sangam, as we call it in Urdu, or the juncture of the two ages. Now, Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wassalam is also at a juncture where he is to bring people from various ages together under the banner of Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. People of the past and people of the future, they are going to be merged together as one people under Ahadu Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So in effect, in practical values, he would achieve what was meant for Ahadu Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to achieve on his behalf, for his sake, as service to him. This is exactly the position of the Muslim of Islam that should be understood by every Ahmadi. So he is not an independent prophet, but a prophet after Ahadu Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. His follower prophet or subordinate prophet is the best word, because this is the word used by the Quran itself. Man yuti Allah wa Rasulah. That means that from now on only a subordinate can come, not an independent person. So because he was a subordinate prophet to Ahadu Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he was subordinate in everything, even this respect. He was subordinate to him, that is, he learned this from him, and because of his subordination to him, he was given this status. And when you analyze things, this is exactly what it amounts to. He is bringing about all the mankind, all the religions of the previous age, together, merge them with the religion of Islam, which is the religion of the last age. Practically, this is being achieved by Masih Maud Islam and his followers, of course. And this is bringing about the two ages together. So because it will be in subordination of Ahadu Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to serve his purpose. So I'm quite right, literally right, when I say that this status was granted to Muslim Maud Wasalam in subordination of Ahadu Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, not independently.
But in silence also Zulkarnain.
Yes. This is the beauty of the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran relates historical incidents. Noah and Abraham and Moses and other prophets, Lord and so other prophets. Now, why are they related? All the knowledgeable people who do deal with the subject of commentary of the Holy Quran agree that these incidents are quoted and preserved in the Holy Quran to denote that things like this are going to happen either to Huzur Akram Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam or to his followers. So these qasas are not just like stories, tales which are things of the past. They are tales which are to be fulfilled in future. So Ahadu Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself put his stamp upon this interpretation. This angle of vision has been approved by Huzur Akram Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So when it was said about Joseph, Hazrat Yusuf, that you will pass through, it appears that he would pass through the same conditions, he agreed. In fact, he used the very words, La tasriba alaykum al-yawm, when he returned to Mecca. And again you see famine, again at his hands, Al-Bakar fed, because he permits their caravans to pass through Medina. Had he refused, they could have been totally destroyed by famine. So there are so many things, and as Hazrat Yusuf was thrown in a well and abandoned, so he was encircled in a valley called Shaykh Abi Talib and abandoned there. So of course similarities do not mean that they are yard to yard or inch for inch similarities. They are general similarities. So that shows that although Zulkarnain is a real story of an old king whose name was Darius. Darius was it? No, Cyrus. It doesn't mean that the Holy Quran only wanted to relate the tale of Cyrus. It had a significance. So when people say who was real Zulkarnain, they sometimes know that it was Cyrus, but they mean what was the significance of this. So when I said Ahadu sallallahu alayhi wa sallam Zulkarnain, I only meant in interpretation, in true significance. He was the one who in the eyes of Allah was to be the bringer of two ages together, Zulkarnain.
Last part of it.
Is there a part of
First
of all, tell me, how many parts does the last part have? Huh?
How can two prophets come at the same time?
That was already asked. They can come exactly in the same manner as they came at the time of Moses. Has it dawned upon you so slowly? It was quite a belated laugh. Exactly as they came.